Isn't it great that we have you in our midst? We've had you in our midst for so long, and then there's these long periods where we know you're writing and you read poems, and then finally the book comes out after years and years and years of waiting. And years and years. So thank you, everyone. I haven't seen this room this full, and I know why. Because this woman deserves it. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to give you an introduction of her book. Because I want to, and because I also was waiting for years and years for the book. I believe it's the image and its many multitudes of archetypal associations that drive Marsha's poetry. But she doesn't just stay with that Proustian device of, this little leaf reminds me of my mother's apron. She pushes her associative leaps into multiple worlds within this world that are deeply and sometimes darkly or violently psychological, metaphysical, even delving into ancient legends or myths. To follow one of Marsha's poems is for me an act of avid curiosity at first, and always infused with utter trust and belief. I know she will take me along, offering to me the lyrics and narratives inside her nests of boxes like little Russian dolls that she will open for me with spine and defiant courage, one after the other. I was lucky to read Marsha's manuscript 3 years ago, at about the same time as the Me Too movement finally acquired a sudden national attention, we know why, and raised its blessed, beautiful, loud, and necessary voice. It was such a propitious and ripe synchronicity, because for the time it took for Marsha's book to come out, thanks to the amazing Pitt Poetry Series, which, by the way, is not a lesser publisher, by the way. This movement is taking on the many-pronged battles that it is now waging. Marsha's poems belong to those wars. Absolutely. She has such talent in making her poems heart-wrenching personal experience into more universal poems by infusing them with women's history, with its stories of sexual and physical abuse, as well as feminism and contemporary politics. And her poems belong in my personal anthology of favorite poems, where I place them along with the heart-wrenching and sometimes violent and lyrical works of Bridget Pegeen Kelly or Joy Harjo or Terence Hayes or Lucille Clifton or Plath, among so many other seminal poets. But there's Marsha's unique and immediately recognizable tone in all of her poems, that urgent, listen to me tone that I so love. Her poem, Self-Portrait as Daphne. The Running Fire poem with its 2 interconnectable columns. Or the poem, I Still Say Your Name, which brings tears to my eyes every time. But then, here again, those poems would not be so unique, so decidedly and sharply original, if Marsha did not enrich them with her most admirable control of craft. And I'll never tire to admire her imagery. In the first draft of this introduction, I quoted 7 examples illustrating this, but why not let her have her delight you with her lines? So it is with deep friendship, with respect and love and joy that I ask you to applaud my sister in poetry, Marsha de la O.
Okay, sister woman, that's quite a tome. I had no idea what to expect. But beautiful, thank you. That's an honor, and thank you all for being here. And I want to just say one thing about what she said, where she said the Me Too movement, and then you said something about the war. And it is true, of course, that there is a war against women, but I just want to make clear that that is not true of all men.
No.
That is so not true of all men. And actually something happened that really changed what my reading was going to be, and that was I was up last night, I'd say between 12 and 3, because our friend, poet Richard Beban died recently, and he died May 1st, but I didn't find out about it till May 3rd, and I just felt that needed to change everything about what I was planning on reading. So I'm gonna dedicate this reading to Richard Beban in a big way, and Richard was a hero to me and an exemplar of generosity, forgiveness, and creativity, especially because I knew something about the difficulties of his youth, which he never mentioned, but it was there between us. An older woman that I knew from San Francisco, who was a teacher and then a lifelong friend of Richard's, told me what he faced and overcame. And so that was a factor in our relationship from then on. And I had something that I needed to tell him, and I just always thought I'd have the chance to talk to him again. So if you don't mind, I'm going to tell you, because it does have to do with all of us and our poetry community, and it has to do with our poet friend who passed, Jackson Wheeler, and this book. And Jackson Wheeler passed in 2017. So Richard and his wife Karen moved to Paris, I don't know, like 2011, and they were back for a visit in 2016 in LA, and we ran into them, and he asked how things were going, and we told him that our friend Jackson Wheeler had a brain tumor, and we hoped that he could publish another book. And at that time, I was thinking he was in remission, and I was thinking he had 7 to 10 years to live. And we were walking down the stairs next to Richard. We were leaving, and he just stopped on the stair step, and suddenly his checkbook was floated out there in his hand. And who carries a checkbook? And in the next 30 seconds, he wrote out a check for $1,000 for Jackson's book, no questions asked, no terms. And that sealed the deal right there. And we, at that time, it was something we had maybe intended on doing, but he made it something that we had to do. And so we made a covenant. We made a covenant right there on the steps because he did that. And Jackson didn't have 7 to 10 years. He had 7 to 10 months. And we barely, for various reasons, got that book out before he passed. And when we walked into his house, his partner was there, turned sideways, and he said, real casually, he said, he's been waiting for this. He didn't want the book to come out posthumously. And I suddenly understood that he was surviving for this. And our jaws just dropped at the mercy that it actually happened that way, that we got it out. And then we had a book launch for him that he was too ill to attend. And people who loved him from 4 counties came. And by that time, the medical bills had seriously piled up because he needed constant caretakers there. And they came up and they looked at the book and they said, so many people said, I'd like to buy that book for $100. And so money just poured in, and we were able to raise $9,000, and we gave it all to his partner, and they didn't lose the house. And this reading that we were doing for him, where other people were reading his poems, Phil was recording it, and he made an audio recording the next day and got it over there, and those last 2 weeks of his life, his partner played it for him constantly, and he heard people reading his own poems and telling him how much he meant to them. And all this happened because Richard Beban was such a quick draw on generosity. So every poem in this reading, which is totally themed about gratitude and about people who help and who have helped me, and about the natural world as a matrix for healing, and about accepting the great forces, every poem is for Richard Beban. This first poem is called Lament, and I wrote it at the passing of the great California poet and former U.S. poet laureate Phil Taggart. Lament. The wisteria disappeared early this year, blown out by a merciless wind you called the Levant. Trees shuddering, wind tearing at the ruined sea. Like you, I traveled to live in a village in Spain. Mornings I watched gypsy day laborers on the corner waiting for flatbed trucks in their thin jackets. And in the evening, the tiny figure of the flower seller with her bundles trudging the length of Calle Madrid. The Levant swept over the red butte down deep cuts toward the village, battered our faces, our hearts. One relentless morning, I pried off my wedding ring, left my family, and bought a ticket at the Valencia Estación del Norte. I remember rusting autos in ravines as we left the city. A broken, open emptiness in my chest that might have been possibility. Wind punishing the silver-backed leaves of the olive trees. If you wait long enough, the wind answers itself. Didn't you say that? The train strained up a grade towards a white village. A magpie swooped over stubble in the fields. The wait wasn't long. The wind died. I looked out and saw storks nesting on rooftops, on high balustrades, the brushwork of their nests large enough for a child, an 8-year-old, like my daughter, her gangly legs outpacing her, my stork child. The air grew calm. I shoved the ring back over the knuckle of my third finger and got off at the next stop. The only answer to death is love. Caballero, you have gone into the hard earth of your valley, the great mountains brooding in the east, our sierras, their relentless grinding, slip and sudden thrust upward, outward, our broken-hearted California. The next poem is about the first time Phil and I saw the Rio Grande. We were invited to lunch in New Mexico at Amalia Madueño's house, and he lives in a remote area, like empty country outside of Taos. And we'd never been to an empty country type house and lunch, but we knew that if you go all the way out there, you're gonna stay about 5 hours for lunch. Amalio Madueño is a writer who draws on indigenous Mexican heritage, and he also was like a rock hunter. He was somebody who wandered into the hills looking for petroglyphs, and then he GPS them so that the archaeologists could find them and no one else. It's called Rio Grande. Susan at the barbecue grilling squash and corn while Amalio takes us down to the river, the Navajo call, female waters tumbling south. Light dazzled golden eye, scent of chamisa. And now the smell of thunder, wet basalt. Massive house of spirits breathing the walls, walking the earth in twilight, the beneficent or not. And you get a whiff from miles below, something lithic, stirring in darkness, waiting. We live in the rift. And what can we do but sit down at the table and pass the platters, eating and drinking this world, our brief time together, slipping into rhythms of water pouring south under cottonwood, their great antlers spreading tines, winged seeds waiting on the wind, on song lines in the leaves, river throat laying down its thudding beat, and the plumed children tear loose and fly. The next poem is about my beloved neighbor, and his name was David Sechrist. It's called I Still Say Your Name. Like the perfect neighbor. I mean, not that he didn't make a lot of noise, he did. Not that he wasn't nocturnal and I was diurnal, that's the way it was. He was a guy who recovered from war by living a life devoted to music, animals, food, and gardening. He played in a bar band and trained dogs. He was totally a great example for me. He was a great example of how to live. And he died of a disease that 94% of the people who have it survive. But he did not have health insurance. So what a waste. I still say your name, even though you finally blew the roof off this place and flew away over highways and housetops into yonder. Maybe there's no drum machines where you're at. Maybe there's stacks of garages, a warren, a whole city, and a band's tuning up in each one. An empty place at the drum set, a kit with a missing man. Slide into your seat, touch sticks to skin. The bass player picks up the rhythm, easy. All of you swinging into it. By now you got your boogaloo. By now your mojo's working. Sound going down like velvet, like whiskey. Go on. Play the tune about hope. Close your eyes. Play the dark where music comes from. That tune so perishing sweet, that tune where wings brush your face. And when you open your eyes, you're at the river, young and strong again. Sticks in your hand, going like magic. Now, play one for us back here, a little song of remembrance. Play the one about the man who came home with a shepherd pup. One last thing to love before quitting this world, one last love to share. And how that dog sang for hours the morning after. This next poem is called The Essence of Water. And it's about something that I think is just a fundamental truth. And that is the abundance of nature as a matrix for human healing. If we can stand in right relationship, if we can get it right, and there's so much right now we have to correct about where we stand in relationship to the natural world. The essence of water. A dove calls, turning its small motor over and over again. Late July, a grove of California live oaks. The old weavers spin their sugar, luff out oxygen, light falling through beveled leaves onto leaves below. Something like presence rustling in the silence. All creatures know to stay still, hoping to hold on to their one life. If I had to do it all over again, beginning with a true reckoning, would fear be torn out by its roots? And now, wind, invisible stream flowing east, one quantity contained in another. The lungs of the Pacific breathing out in afternoon, jangling sunlight. Each leaf a transparency, each leaf a prism. The Upanishads say, the essence of all beings is the earth. The essence of earth is water. And the essence of water is the tree. Above the trunks and spreading limbs, soft spheres of lit moisture, fine spun, the hours reworking their boundaries. If we could let their equivalents move through our bodies, surely we would know something of their quietude. What would be enough to enter the peace of oaks? It takes so much trust to walk out alone, contained in otherness, to let dusk fill the valley and overflow the hilltops, to step into 1,000-fold of leaves, light slipping away, wavering shadows floating in air. And I want this courage. I want to walk alone at night beneath the skirts of leaves and reach up to touch the hem, just close enough, as darkness sharpens the moon's golden knife and wind stirs pianissimo in the crown. Each leaf must be a syllable of permission, a way to say yes. Let touch teach me. So when I think about that poem about healing, I just want to bring up Richard one more time. Richard wrote a line in one of his poems, something like, quote, "The boy became a man instantly when the cell door clanged shut." And most people might have read that about Richard as a metaphor, but I'm very clear that it was literal and not quite true. Or maybe he was using a kind of shorthand. The boy did not become a man in an instant. He remained a truncated boy in a cage. And the man worked the rest of his life to set the boy free, over and over. When I saw Richard in Paris, he had given up poetry. He said that he had already said everything he needed to say. He was walking 8 to 13 miles a day. He had a camera, his eyes, his great heart. He was working in black and white, setting the boy free again, setting the aperture in the city of light. This last poem I'm going to read, Northern Lights and Sound, addresses the Northern Lights and the many reports from people in the vicinity who lived there, that when they went out there under the Northern Lights, they heard sounds. There was a sound associated with the lights, and the scientists told them that was not true, it couldn't be, there was no mechanism for sound. Until they found an explanation for why the people who were out there actually knew, and they were able to put together why it actually happened. So this last poem is working with the idea that the limits of our knowledge do not describe the nature of reality. It's just an edge of what we know, and we need to remember that. And the last sentence of this poem also is my last sentence for Richard. Northern Lights and Sound. They said it was synesthesia. They said it was only human. No sound, they said. What folklore? But it goes on ticking, this question of silence, of what's coming in on the solar wind. Windflowers? Is it possible to hear dreams that stream through the night sky at certain latitudes? Yes, I say. They're magnetically charged like ghosts. Everyday campfires. Any room you walk into. Have you ever gone nocturnal? Gone so far north that day never dawns? In those latitudes, the idea is we know nothing about depth, don't know what we can't see. It's dark inside our bodies. When the auroras sing their hissing songs, pianissimo, sparks and clicks, claps and slaps, when air cracks open, when night swirls her ruffled skirts, her cloak of many colors, is it the music you choose? Maybe not, but why choose? Why not let color be sound, be stain, be scrim? Why not ask who ground the yarrow for ochre, brewed the spell to bind dark to light, painted the walls in this, our labyrinth? Storm is of the essence, the dancers under the hill. Can you see her scarves in the night? Thank you.